Hello Internet, my name is the Golden Stalfos, and today we're going to continue talking about Eragon, or more properly, The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. But first, let me give a quick shout out to Linda. That's a great bag, Linda. It really matches. You're doing great. Thanks so much for watching. And if your name isn't Linda, then subscribe. Maybe I'll say your name next time. Alright, so our topic today is the weird ass things that are included in this story that do technically have some reason to be there, but also you could easily cut them and not really lose much. Starting with the least cuttable, Roran. Now, as I've said before, Roran's story is objectively much more interesting than Eragon's story if you actually bother to read it. But since you only get introduced to it in the second book, where you really have already built a connection with Eragon and you don't want to get distracted from Eragon's story, and because you only switch character perspectives during a fucking cliffhanger, it just doesn't get read, because why would I read it when I could just skip forward to the next Eragon section? And also, it doesn't really affect the plot at all. If you took out Roran's storyline entirely and just let the people of Carvajal stay in Carvajal, and that's it, that they just stay there throughout the entire war and don't get involved at all, nothing changes about the plot. Eragon does all the same shit anyway, right? Like, he still goes and learns magic. He still probably goes and kills the Razak to get revenge. You know, he still fights the war and beats Murtagh. There's nothing about the plot that changes because Roran is there, right? Roran does have a reason to be there. You know, he gives us a perspective of the world from a non-magical character, and he lets us see aspects of the war we wouldn't otherwise see. And obviously he's Eragon's cousin, so there's an effect on Eragon's personality and whatnot that we get to explore, but it doesn't affect the plot. It doesn't affect the events of the world. Roran goes out to battle, wins, comes home a hero, but if he just stayed at home, it wouldn't matter. Now, obviously, we spend a lot of time with Roran, and his sections are interesting, and they do tell us a lot about the world and about Eragon and stuff, so it's not a complete waste, but it is missing that last little bit of meaningfulness. And thinking about every time when Roran does something important that seems important to the plot, if you took Roran out, that element wouldn't have existed in the first place, right? Like in the final battle, there's this big guy with a hammer who Roran has to, or a mace rather, that Roran has to beat up because he's just going around killing everyone. He like kills Islan Zadi or whatever. And so Roran comes up with this plan to beat the shit out of him and win the battle. But if Roran wasn't in the battle, if we didn't have to like follow Roran's perspective and give Roran an obstacle to overcome, that guy wouldn't have been there. We wouldn't have talked about the battle outside the castle at all after Eragon got in. We just wouldn't have noticed it, right? The fighting would have continued outside as normal fighting, and then Eragon would have had his battle with Galbatorix. Then when he wins, they go out and sweep the battlefield, as you do. In other words, things would have played out exactly the same way they did, but without Roran. And the same basically goes for everything Roran does. He takes that one city on the coast, but again, we didn't need to see that battle. That didn't affect anything, you know? He goes back into Serta and defends a city and kills 200 people by himself or whatever, but we didn't need to see that either. That doesn't matter. It's absurd. And on a similar note, a much less important character, Eva, the weird cursed child that Eragon accidentally cursed. Why is she here? What purpose does she serve? Like, seriously, what? I kind of get the idea of showing how Eragon, you know, was reckless when he made the blessing or whatever, and he has to go back and fix it. Okay, sure. But beyond that, she doesn't do anything. Like, she's just there to be kind of creepy and say mean things. She doesn't affect the plot, and she doesn't really tell us anything about the characters. She's just there. if we take her out of the story, if we say that her curse doesn't manifest until she becomes a certain age, and like that would be years after the events of the story, so it never happens. Nothing changes then. Nothing about the story is affected at all. At all. She's introduced as a plot device, and she only shows up in the plot at the very end for a sequence of traps in the castle. But we're explicitly told that this sequence of traps in the castle was set up because Galbatorix knew about Eva's powers and knew it wouldn't stop them anyway. So if Eva wasn't there, then he just wouldn't have set up those traps. Because he didn't want to kill them all, he wanted to capture them. So, what did she accomplish? I know people would say like, oh, well, she defended Natsuwata from that assassination attempt or whatever. But like, so? There are a billion different ways that she could have survived an assassination attempt without involving this weird magic child. Again, it's just an element that takes up a lot of time and a lot of ink is spilled on it, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't have a lot of purpose. For that matter, Natsuwata herself is kind of underdeveloped or overdeveloped, depending on your perspective. Yeah, the resistance needs a leader, and obviously that can't just be Eragon because he's got other shit to do. But the amount of time we spend with Natsuwata isn't really enough to give her like her own full arc and story and stuff the way like Roran gets. But it is enough to like spend multiple chapters on pointless political negotiations that just progress the plot in the way it was already going to progress. When we see through Natsuwata's eyes, we do get a broader experience of the world. Like, we get to see, what the high politics bullshit is like, and a little bit of stuff about the Eastern tribes or whatever. But ultimately, not that much happens in her chapters, and I don't know if we needed to have so many of them. Or maybe we should have had more of them. Maybe she should have had more of a story like Roran did. I'm not sure, but it feels like a half inclusion at the moment. And lastly, there's some really random arbitrary shit that is thrown in for utterly no reason. There is an altercation between Eragon and an ancient tree lady, in which the ancient tree lady asks if he'll pay any price to get the precious metal for his sword, and he says yes, and then she's like, good, and lets him go without anything else. And then when he asks her about it later, she doesn't say anything anyway. What is the point of creating this weird question that hangs in the air and goes nowhere and is never addressed again? You even went out of your way to bring it up a second time. Like, why are you wasting space with this? Or the weird old man who lives in an abandoned elf tower and farms peas and is constantly hunting the next question and is apparently Angela's teacher. But like, why? Why do we need to have that at all? We don't need any of Angela's backstory. She's the archetypal weird old witch character. We don't need a backstory for that. She can just be a weird, quirky non sequitur. That's the point of her character. Or like, at one point, Angela is talking to these two girls who I don't really know what their deal is because they don't even give their names. They might be like a mother-daughter couple. They might be like a lesbian couple. They might just be traveling companions. It is very much not explained what their deal is or why they're important. And then they just kind of randomly show up again in the last battle, just like kind of fighting. But they're just mentioned briefly and then glossed over. These two characters have a grand total of 2 paragraphs spread out across 4 books. Like they're mentioned twice. And each time they're mentioned, they take up a paragraph. But like, why? We never get their names. Why are they important? Why are they here? Like, I assume this is meant to lead into some sort of sequel or side story or whatever that never got published. But why? Like, it's so fucking dumb. Why do I have brain space dedicated to this? And those are just kind of the bigger things. Like, there's lots of tiny things that are there just to tell us about the lore of the world, but don't really do much in that regard. For example, at the last battle before Galbatorix took over, the Dragon Island got blown up by a nuke because someone converted their whole energy into a bomb, and that irradiated the place, and that's why no one lives there anymore, and also where these weird grub things come from. But, like, does any of that need to be there? Do we need any of that? Like, or when they're on their way flying to that place, there's this really long aside where they run into a big sea monster and talk about its origins and shit for like a page and a half. What does this have to do with anything? What is the point? Like, I guess it's cool. It's a cool sea monster and it's an interesting, but like, what does it matter? And so, of course, the story is full of shit like that, but I guess that's just like world building details and it's okay, but a lot of it feels really random. Anyway, let me know in the comments what your favorite weird, possibly unnecessary detail from these books is, and I'll see you in the next life. Thanks for watching. Laters. Hey, Endcard here. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Like, seriously though, please subscribe. I have like no subscribers. It's sad. If you want to find me on other social media stuff, you can do that at the Golden Stalfos on basically everything. Links to that are in the description, as well as to some charities I like but am obviously not affiliated with. I also have a Patreon if you like me so much that you want to give me money, though obviously only do that if you have money to burn, and if you do have money to burn, they're the charities I mentioned before. They probably need it more than I do. Mad ups to my girlfriend for doing all the editing for these videos. It's a really big help. Oh, and I occasionally stream on Twitch, so follow me there so you don't miss it. I don't have a formal schedule because when I tried to have a formal schedule, I couldn't keep to it. So, oh well. Okay, thanks. Bye.